Hello there, and welcome back to War Thunder. Today, this is yet another ship review, and this time it's about the German Type 1934A. This is the first German Tech Tree 4.3 battle rating destroyer, and so I want to compare it to all the other nations' Tech Tree 4.3 destroyers, or at least the first one if they have multiple of them, to give you a big picture about the Tech Tree equivalents. And while the ship on its basic configuration looks very similar to the Type 1936 and also the premium version, the Z-20 Karl Galster, there are some differences that I think are worth pointing out. Furthermore, because there is also this time again a 5-minute guide about the historical career of those ships included by Drachinifel, linked to his YouTube channel in the video description down below. I have to say this video might be also part of a slightly bigger project between of us, so I hope you enjoy and let's go right into it.
The Type 1934A destroyers were modified versions of the Type 1934 destroyers. These ships were the first true destroyers built for the German Navy after World War I and came in at a fairly substantial 2,200 tons plus standard displacement, edging over 3,000 tons at full load. They had been designed quickly in anticipation of the Anglo-German naval agreement, as the previous Versailles restrictions had limited German destroyer designs to 800 tons, which these ships very comfortably exceeded. They were designed primarily as a response to the appearance of the large French destroyers of the 1920s and 1930s, such as the Le Fantastique class. Although, as with many 1930s German designs, they were officially only 1,625 tons, which was a complete and utter lie. The Type 1934s, however, suffered from a number of critical flaws. This was down to the fact that not only were they the first destroyers designed in Germany for over a decade, but their design period was also rushed. As a result, they had fairly poor seakeeping, their new high-pressure steam boiler systems didn't really work very well, and despite their large displacement, they were fairly top-heavy and unstable. To cap it all off, to stop the ships from rolling over, they had to keep a significant amount of their fuel in the tanks low in the ship, which limited their range. And for the final insult to injury, despite having a heavy main armament, the amount of shells carried per gun was relatively low, which would come back to bite them later. The Type 1934As were an attempt to address the worst of these concerns, and to a certain extent they succeeded, at least in addressing the worst of the seakeeping issues. In keeping with their characteristics as responses to the French destroyers, the 1934As were pretty fast at 36 knots. Their armament consisted of 5 single 128mm or 5-inch guns, with a pair superfiring forward, a pair superfiring aft, and a 5th gun amidships. 2 twin 37mm flak cannon and 6 single 20mm flak cannon completed the default anti-aircraft loadout. Torpedoes were represented by 2 quadruple torpedo launchers, and the ships were also capable of carrying up to 60 mines, along with depth charges, which were launched from 4 depth charge launchers and held in 6 racks. The Type 1934As would be one of only 3 classes of German destroyer to actually have names, with the Type 1936A onwards taking up the regular hull numbers only approach. The ships were named mostly after torpedo boat commanders from the First World War. Their initial sensor suite consisted of the Mark I human eyeball and some hydrophones, although over the war surviving units would have radar, radar detectors, and in 1 or 2 cases some active sonar installed. Additionally, the anti-aircraft armament would be improved with additional 37mm, 40mm and quad 20mm guns being installed in 1943 and 1944 where at all possible. Almost every ship would have a different anti-aircraft battery by the end of the war. For example, one ship carried 2 40mm guns, 8 20mm in 2 quad mounts, 4 37mm in 2 twin mounts and 4 20mm in 2 twin mounts, whilst another ship carried 14 37mm guns in 7 twin mounts and 4 20mm in a single quad mount. Of the 12 ships built, 7 would be lost. The Z-7 Hermann Sherman and Z-16 Friedrich Eckholt would both be lost attacking Arctic convoys in fights with British town-class cruisers, which is relatively understandable, and Z-8 Bruno Heinemann struck a couple of mines on its way back to French ports after escorting the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau in the Channel Dash, and this is just basically vagaries of war. However, the remaining 4 losses, that being Z-9 Wolfgang Zenker, Z-11 Bernd von Arnim, Z-12 Erich Gies, and Z-13 Erich Kölner, were all lost as part of the 10 German destroyers lost at the Second Battle of Narvik, and in this case the design limitations of the 1934As were the thing that came back to bite them, as we mentioned earlier, because with their limited ammunition stocks, the Z-9 and Z-11 were actually out of ammo and basically couldn't fight, having exhausted most of their ammunition stocks fighting the First Battle of Narvik. Z-12 and Z-13 did have some ammunition, but ultimately they were up against a British destroyer flotilla backed up by HMS Warspite, and that was pretty much the end of that. The survivors would be transferred to the various Allied navies, with Z-10 Hans Lodi going to the UK, Z-5 Paul Jacobi and Z-6 Theodor Redel transferred to France, and Z-14 Friedrich Inn and Z-15 Erich Steinbrink being transferred to the Soviet Union.
In War Thunder, the Type 1934A has absolutely no armor on the hull, and that makes it very vulnerable to high explosive shells, even from autocannons, such as the Type 1934 and also the Project 159 in particular, where you take massive amounts of damage in a very short time. And while the fragmentation and shrapnel protection helps, it doesn't really save you because you're living on borrowed time. The only armor that you find on a ship is around the turrets, but it's just 8mm thick, so even medium-sized high explosive shells and the 20mm autocannon fire and up can easily disable them, even with some random AP shot hits. But you have 5 of those single mountings, so that gives you actually a very good broadside, and also the majority of your firepower is mostly focused on the rear of the ship, which gives you now the advantage that most of the people are actually trying to take out the front part of the ship. And so the problem that, for example, the battle class or the HMS Armada for the British or the USS Sumner for the Americans have with their double-barreled turrets, that they get focused down first and then you can just take up the rest of the ship, is not as prominent as with this. However, the turrets are some of the slowest turning ones in the game. The same goes for also the anti-aircraft armament. The 37mm double mountings, while looking good on paper, are actually single firing one. One funny side note is that the high explosive shells have 10 grams less than the armor-piercing shells for the 37s. So they are probably best used not against the aircraft but against the patrol boats, but if a patrol boat comes that near, you could use the 20mm instead. You have 6 of them against single mountings. So that actually tells you that against aircraft you have a bit of a problem, because you cannot engage those high-flying bombers like the PE-8 or the Heinkel 111, which drop either the 5-ton bomb at you or the Fritz X, which are a big problem. Also, the ammunition of the guns will be discussed later, as this is a pure anti-ship gun and not a dual-purpose gun mounting. So then furthermore we have 8 torpedoes, and they are actually a unique G7E mod T5A, more on this in a moment, but basically they are like the G7E, but just not with so good stats. They have the same caliber, you have 2 quadruple launchers, and like with any destroyer and any cruiser in the game, I highly recommend to just drop the tops early on, even if you just don't even fire them into the direction of the enemy. It is very important that the torpedo tubes are empty, because they always or very often result in a one-shot detonation, and that is not very nice. Talking about one-shot detonations, your ammo-racks are actually on the waterline, so they are still hittable. However, they are not as prominent as, for example, on the Haida or some other destroyers, and that is due to the fact that you don't have that much ammunition in the first place. Again, we talk about this later. However, very unique to mostly the German destroyers is that an ammunition cook-off does not automatically mean that you get destroyed by that. So you have to extinguish the fire, you have to repair the turrets, mostly the front turrets, and then you're okay to go, and in theory you can go into a capture zone and then refill your ammunition, although currently this takes a while. And the same goes for the rear. I think the rear ammo rack is more prominent and easier to hit and a bit wider, and again directly on the waterline and down. However, the ship also takes a lot of damage from armor piercing in terms of the transmission and the engines getting knocked out, and the same goes for the rudder, although the rudder not being that big of a target, so you have this as a benefit compared to some of the allied destroyers. Now let's have a look at some other statistics. So let's have a look at some numbers, and we can see that we have 5 128mm turrets. This is actually a pretty decent amount of guns, and the caliber seems to be also alright. However, now you can see the Achilles heel of this ship type, which is the low amount of ammunition, so that's just only 120 rounds per gun. And because you have such a high rate of fire, that actually shames all the other destroyers in this comparison. With 3.6 seconds for an ace crew, you can run dry pretty quickly. So your insane DPM of 83.3 shells per minute, technically or in theory, is also not hampered if you lose one or two of the gun turrets, compared to the double mountings on the Tribal, for instance, or the PR7U, which really hurts this ship's DPM. But that's not all. We see this later on, that the ship's DPM means absolutely nothing in the average battle. That has to do with the lack of accuracy of the guns, especially at longer ranges, and also the relatively low damage output of the shells. But let's talk about the torpedoes here for a moment. They are nothing spectacular. In fact, the range is decent here. I have chosen to not use the torpedo mode, because then the speed is so slow. So if you manage to fire them into a certain direction, they are more like mobile mines than really torpedoes, and they are posing a threat that forces the enemy to do evasive actions and to even straighten out and to avoid them. So they can be seen, and that is more of a threat than the actual chance of hitting anything. You don't have enough torpedoes, and they are not fast enough to effectively disturb the enemy in terms of capping and so forth. The ship itself is one of the heaviest in this comparison. Only the Z-20 is here heavier. So 3,190 tons, and also the highest amount of crew might indicate a certain amount of survivability, but the complete lack of armor actually doesn't really support this claim. Furthermore, the problem is the top speed, with only 56 kilometers in this comparison being the slowest destroyer. And in the race for the caps, or in the race for going into positioning or out of the spawn in the first place, this is crucial, and this is a big drawback. So there you have it, impressive stats on one hand, not so good stats on the other hand. Let's finally come to the reason why the DPM means absolutely nothing. If the shells don't really work that well, then you have a problem. The stock Sprenggranate L4,5 Kopfzünder, or your base HE shell, has an impressive muzzle velocity of 830 meters per second, which is not too bad, to be honest, as you can see in the shell comparison spreadsheet. However, you only have 2 kilograms of TNT equivalent. That is by quite a bit the lowest amount, and so your damage output and even the chance of actually penetrating some of your targets and doing enough damage is low. So in this case you even have problems effectively penetrating the user Sumner's anti-fragmentation site, and that is quite hilarious if you think about it. As a tier 1 upgrade, therefore, you get the Panzergranate 43 APCBC round, or this is basically your armor piercing round with a high explosive filler. Now the muzzle velocity is really great with 875 meters per second, and in contrast to some of the other armor piercing shells from the other ships, it can also retain that energy and that muzzle velocity over greater distance because it has this ballistic cap. The penetration power in this case is now the highest, and because you have this fuse sensitivity and this fuse delay working together, which in terms of, because this is nearly copy-paste stats from tank shells, where it's a drawback, you actually can penetrate cruiser armor, the Citadel armor, and actually deal massive damage. Combine this with your amount of DPM, and you know, the bigger targets are actually the ones that fear you more than the other destroyers. Or if somebody is bow in, they just plow through the entirety of the ship and destroy everything in their way. You also can specifically aim at close quarters for enemy gun turrets and take them out. But again, the burst charge here is quite pitiful, and especially against the PR7U, it is quite comically low. Then as a tier 2 consecutive upgrade, we have the Sprenggranate L4,5 mit Bodenzünder, basically an HE shell with a base fuse. The problem here is, while you have still a great muzzle velocity of 830 meters per second, your TNT filler gets actually reduced to only 1.4 kilograms. That is really bad. The shell design actually tries to compensate for that by actually having a fuse delay of 0.8 meters, giving the shell a better chance to penetrate deep into the enemy's ship guts and then detonate near vital parts such as ammo racks, or also then engine rooms and so forth. And you indeed have a higher chance of damaging those modules, but the amount of damage that you do to the crew is quite limited, and even 4-inch guns have quite higher bursting charges. And what you actually lack is here any sort of proximity fuse or anti-aircraft shell. So this actually enhances the problem with your vulnerability to aircraft. So I don't think that this ship has the greatest chance against defending itself against aircraft, which are a big problem in War Thunder ships currently. And so, especially if somebody goes for a revenge kill, the best choice is not another ship, but in fact aircraft, which is kind of not so nice. So what is then the idea of how to use the ship? Well, due to its many limitations, like the vulnerability against aircraft, the rather slow turret rotation speed, the limited amount of ammunition, the highly inaccurate guns, and also then the low damage output of the single shell, you need to ambush one enemy at a time, and you need to have another ship with you that protects you against aircraft. And then at especially close quarters where the enemy ship cannot really maneuver, you can use your DPM to just shred the enemy ship, aim for specific parts like gunning down the enemy's offensive systems, or trying to detonate a torpedo, or going for the ammo racks of an enemy ship with your armor piercing shot. But again, then you cannot sustain that fight for very long. However, what you also can do is ambush enemy cruisers, and you have enough punching power and enough shell performance to pose a real threat. And even if you die in the fight, if you aim for the Citadel, you damage the part of the cruiser that other destroyers cannot really damage that well. So this is where the guns are actually then very good. So now I hope I could show it to you what I mean by that, and here I actually go deliberately for the torpedo tubes on the Krasny-Kavkaz and the DPM at short range under 2 kilometers where the trajectories are flat. We are coming closer. I'm orientating here myself on the hit camera, and I actually disabled already the engine room. And there we go. That was a hit on the torpedo tubes, we detonated it, and that was it. Now this is now the final gameplay, and as usual, I watch here the team list and I recognize, well, we have a problem. We need to help our PT boats out there at this battle rating. If the enemy team has some serious players, like the Jaguar Type 140, 141, or the Albatros, the Type 143, or some crazy American ships like the Asheville or the LCS, deliberately up-tiered. They just absolutely destroy everything that comes their way, and so you very often need the destroyers to clear the way for the remaining PT boats to capture the point, because it's very important that the PT boats, get this point and hold it. Otherwise you would lose the game despite getting many kills. So I think this puts you in a very strange environment for which you are absolutely not perfectly fitted. So the first thing that I do is here actually trying to get my torpedoes away, and I have to turn. The torpedo angles are not as drastically restricted as on the HMS Armada, for instance, where you have to really give 90 degrees broadside. And then after I have emptied here my torpedo tubes, now I can go into the gunfight. So the video will take a while, I know this, but this is now my most successful battle that I actually survived. And there you could see the inaccuracy at the longer ranges. To be honest, I'm saying this because I actually had here quite a bit different experience with the Frunze, also the Kanonboot K2, and some other ships that don't have 5-inch guns. So this seems to be a 5-inch gun issue, except of course for the Russians, because those are some brutal sniper guns. I'm not talking here about taking the wrong lead or just misaiming here a little bit, but very often if you're not quite sure if you give the perfect lead, because some shells fall wide, some shells fall short, and you just don't know, okay, how do I have to correct? And then you get some random ammunition storage hits, like here on the Stroini, and you one-shot them out of nowhere. And there you can see how I just run wildly through the ammunition. I use here salvo fire to observe the fall of shots. If you have the range quite well and you get repeated hits, you could also use single shot fire, especially at close quarters. If you know that you're going to hit on some smaller destroyers, especially if you find out that they don't have the shrapnel protection, even your normal HE shell with only 2 kilograms of TNT filler is enough to wreck them quite quickly. The amount of guns, the DPM, the flat trajectory, you are best suited for fighting at close ranges. But there you can see, per salvo maximum 1 or 2 shells are hitting despite having the perfect range. And this is what I mean. You don't expect to have those inaccurate guns at 4 kilometers. And so that is really wasteful. So you have high rate of fire, you have some guns, like 5 of them, resulting in a very high potential damage, but due to the low damage output per gun and due to the inaccuracy even hitting the enemy, it is very difficult to get the kills that you need, and to actually then reduce the amount of fire that comes in your way in return. So again, stick with your team, get close and get into a position where the enemy can't maneuver too much. It's very tricky with the map design, but at the end I try here my best. Now again, here going for the patrol boat cap is the only viable option, because again, at long range you don't hit anything. Everything else just damage you way too enough, whittles down your crew, and before you actually can seriously think about fighting them and effectively damaging them, they just have damaged you way too much. And again, if you're going off by your alone, there is no protection whatsoever from your teammates. So if you stick close to your teammates, they automatically are either different targets or their anti-aircraft firepower is supporting you, especially the Americans. I see a lot of players actually staying out of the fight behind an island and just waiting for the aircraft to take them down with their 5-inch dual-purpose main batteries. And so if you see somebody doing this, go into this sector where he is positioned and fight there, because aircraft really, they ruin your day. If you destroy a light cruiser captain, they always want their revenge kill. They always want to make some credits to make up for the huge repair costs. And trust me, the 5-ton bomb from the PE-8 just floods you to death, even though it doesn't really hit you, or has such a gigantic blast radius that you just detonate in the first place. So I have multiple targets to shoot, and you can see I'm already really low with my ammunition. I already expended like nearly half of my total ammunition, or I'm about to. And that's quite a lot, and you can see the huge spread, despite the aim not being absolutely correct. Again, if I misfire, I don't know how much I misfire and how I have to correct. That is a big problem, and this is the very same like even with the Type 1924 and all other ships that have 128mm guns. It's actually the same for other nations' ships, but I thought, okay, maybe it's my inexperience, or you know, it is for the Americans because they are dual purpose and also their gun barrels are not that long. But with this, you really feel it, and that's one of the discouraging factors of playing this line. Overall, I think at close quarters, when you just can out DPM somebody really hard, this is where this ship shines. But if you are in close quarters, then a lot of the other nations' ships have overall better gun handling, better turret rotation speed, more anti-aircraft guns, some backups, maybe even armor. So I think overall the ship is decent, the ship is a good fighter, but you need to get close and you need to have those 1 versus 1s or many versus one enemy, where you actually then can you know, be the damage dealer. Again, as you can see here with the base use HE, I hit here Frunze, I believe, repeatedly you know, time and time again, and I just don't really kill off the crew. Despite him being nearly stationary, me being stationary, I know where the shots fall, but I just don't hit him. And that costs me so much ammunition, that costs me so much time. I can't shoot anybody else if somebody is also focusing me. Yeah, and so you're racking up all the assists, but you're not that effective, and that is really weird. Versus patrol boats, of course, even the least capable 5-inch high explosive shell is still a very big threat. And obviously you always have those random shots, like going for the torpedo tubes or going for the ammo racks is an option. And that is always the question, how do you want to take out the enemy? What's the most logical way of dealing with them? In particular, when we maybe see some nations in the future that don't have armor piercing at all. I mean, there is a discussion going on if the German 128mm ever fielded this armor piercing shell in the first place or not. Without it, the value of the ship would drastically sink. The same goes for the Z-20 and basically all 128mm equipped ships. So in this respect, it's open for discussion. Let me know in the comment section what you think about this. But I for myself find it really exhausting getting assists after assists after assists just because I cannot finish off the enemy. And there you can see the anti-aircraft work. The 20mm do not even fire, and the 37mm, they can shoot down the enemy, no doubt about this, but it's rather the exception. And mostly they do not destroy the enemy before they drop their ordnance, so that is also a big problem. Let's make a little cut, and we find ourselves in the cap now, there to refill the ammunition. You can see I'm very low on base use HE, and my armor piercing is not the most efficient one in dealing with broadside targets. So here the enemy goes after me with some patrol boats, and obviously I can deal with them. But here's the problem with the refilling. It is necessary, but only your first front gun gets refilled, and after that then the second one, but always just with the first shell type. So that would actually deserve a bit of a rework, and there you can see the slow turret rotation speed. So I mean, it's better than nothing, but yeah, compared to your DPM, and then also missing, you know, it's the same problem over and over again. So he has like 16%, and I get another kill assist. Yeah, that's my 7th by now, and I tried my best to support the team here, but I have to look back if the enemy is coming after me with patrol boats, and as you can see, they are firing torpedoes. And again, we have the problem of not having those amazing 40mm Bofors, which are so good against aircraft and patrol boats alike. The 20mm, they are not bad, but they just don't cut it anymore at this battle rating in particular, especially because those are single mounting, so it's not the flak filling, which is a viable option, you know, because of the sheer amount of shells. But the single mountings from various different angles, where you have to constantly adjust even more so as with a single quadruple mounting, it is debatable. So you have many micromanagement tasks to fulfill. You really have to watch out for aircraft and patrol boats and everything. It is a ship that is capable of dishing out the punishment, but just under certain circumstances, and this is what makes this ship a bit painful. Now, I think the top speed is always a question on which map you are and where you go. Effectively, I have to say you feel the difference a bit to the Z-20 Karl Galster, and because they are same battle rating ships, I think you can compare them. They look very similar, but the Z-20 is just a bit better. Now, what I try to do here is to just defend this cap and hold it, and I only can support my team in one way or the other. And as you can see, I try to really gun this guy down, and then I get an ammunition storage hit, which seals the deal. And I get now also a plane, so that was a nice double strike. Here I now switch to the 20mm, and I have to mow this patrol boat down. But there you can see, then we are in the reload, and we didn't dish out enough damage. I'm not quite sure if he has launched torpedoes, that's always a danger. But then I switch to the main batteries, and then I just take him out, kill the last crew. That was now the triple strike. That was very important. Situational awareness and preparing for the situation is so important. I cannot make enough fuss about this. Now, there you can see, that is the great thing. We take out here the front gun. I think this is a Type 1924, and he then only has his back guns. He doesn't have the greatest survivability either. It's a smaller destroyer or even patrol boat. So I think I have this under control. The ship's playstyle can be very exciting again with the sheer DPM. If you're fighting around an island and a cruiser tries to attack you, you go for the torpedo tubes and you just fire shot after shot after shot. It is really scary. It is really an intimidating look, or it looks intimidating, I know. But as you can see, sometimes you just don't hit your targets, however you aim. 3 shells fall short, 2 shells fall wide. You completely straddle the enemy salvo after salvo. The inaccuracy at those, what I would say, medium combat ranges is devastating in terms of ammunition need. And then the single shell damage output, as I have now mentioned multiple times. I'm not quite sure. I think when I look now at my Kanonboot K2 or here at my Frunze, which is a destroyer with fewer guns, longer reload, and smaller caliber at lower battle rating, it would massively outgun me. because the shells have more high explosive filler, and the shells also are so much more accurate. They are pinpoint accurate. I made already a video about the phone, so you might want to watch it. Here I try to empty my torpedo tubes, and also, as you can see, the acceleration is not the worst. Again, it was really great that I saw the torpedoes coming. The situation awareness is a big factor. It is very important, as I mentioned. Other destroyers can be a bit more forgiving, such as the Fletcher or the Sumner with the 40mm arrays. Very often I had it that my autogunners just shredded the incoming PT boat before they effectively dropped their torpedoes. And there you can see the 37mm. It takes a while up until you gun down the enemy, but eventually you will succeed. Come on, come on, come on. Yeah, you can see this is not even close to 40mm. It takes so long. Oh, but much aim and so forth. Yeah, that's the thing. You can just waste a lot of time gunning down one single enemy. Overall, the ship has character, but I'm not quite sure if I like this character. The guns are hit and miss, mostly miss, and then the damage output is underwhelming. So that was the best game that I had, with I think 7 kills and 2 aircrafts. And I survived the battle. I did here my job. I showed you some action versus other destroyers previously. Let's have a quick look at the post-battle results. So 42,000 civilians and 5,700 research points. Survivor award. That was a nice battle. There you could see. At that point I still was spading the vehicle. What is very important is obviously the rudder replacement, the shrapnel protection, also the ammunition, and of course also the primary armament for faster turret rotation, which is mandatory on this ship. That's finally it for me today. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Please give this video a like if it did, subscribe if you want to see more. Let me know in the comment section what you think about this type of presentation. If you want to see more ships, if you want to see special ships, let me know. And as usual, we'll see each other on the battlefields, in the skies, and on the waves of War Thunder.